West's best friends in the Middle East.
In 1963, the Shah of Iran introduced a 19-point plan called the White Revolution. It was designed to bring revolutionary change without bloodshed. Amidst a failing democracy and low support, the Shah needed to make a radical change or risk defeat. It rapidly modernized the Iranian culture, economy, and social structure. The White Revolution in Iran ushered in an era of overarching rights through a series of land and societal reforms that worked to westernize and modernize a developing nation rapidly. The Iranian government's responsibility and duty towards serving the greater good of its people became highly prioritized. Oil turned Iran from an underdeveloped state in the Middle East to a highly contested region by foreign powers. The nationalization of all Iranian oil companies in 1951 brought more revenue to Iran and led to more governmental control in the economy. Politically, nationalization shifted power away from the reigning Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, to Mohammad Mossadegh, the prime minister who implemented it. It became clear during this time that Iran was not going to let developed countries overpower them. Nationalization gave Iran leverage in foreign affairs. There is concrete evidence of the friendship that exists between our two countries, and of our desire that Iran prosper independently in the family of free nations. Domestically, oil offered new opportunities to stimulate development or to concentrate the wealth in the hands of the highest elites. In the wake of the 1951 oil nationalization, Mossadegh and his National Front Party were a threat to Western nations. Mossadegh also made enemies with the Shah, leading to a common enemy. The Shah agreed to stand against the Soviet Union and promote American values in exchange for a return to power and economic aid. In 1953, the CIA initiated a coup that had Mossadegh convicted of treason and put the Shah firmly back in power. However, Mossadegh was very popular, and his removal sparked the first anti-American and Shah sentiments among Iranians. Even in the 1960s, Iran was still a feudalist nation with many lacking rights. The entirety of land was owned by less than 1,000 elite families, who were also the sole representatives in government. Only 20% of the population was illiterate, and they had no way to improve. These inequalities and lack of rights created an environment primed for change. Throughout his time in office, the Shah abused and exploited power. He blackmailed President Kennedy into giving him military funding under the guise of economic stimulation. His counteroffer was that if this did not happen, he would align himself with the communist Soviet Union. Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi often manipulated and thwarted Kennedy's plans towards Iran, and used American fears of communism to gain increased financial aid and military support. He crushed opposition as soon as it emerged by using his secret police to uphold his dictatorship. This led to a large public distrust, as he was still closely aligned with the West, yet was blackmailing them as well. While his public goal was to increase the rights of Iranian citizens, many of his policies violated them for his own power.
Perhaps not publicly, but privately, are worried about the extension of your armed forces, about what you're up to in the Gulf and the Indian Ocean. Do you mean to create a new Persian empire?
No. No, and I don't think that really the Arabs are afraid, because when we see them, they never express that fright. It's mostly the Western news media who are just trying to make a bogey out of us.
By the 1960s, leadership change and time made Iran less important to the U.S., and their alliance floundered. JFK even threatened to cut off all Iranian military support, ignored the Shah's recommendation, and even suggested replacing Iran as an oil supplier. The White Revolution was his way of gaining relevance again, and he understood that much of the public resented his actions, but the White Revolution would grant the Shah the common people's support who gained more influence under his policies. He believed it was his responsibility to make Iran a world power. The White Revolution was the Shah's way to leave a lasting legacy for himself and for his heir. One of the main aspects of the White Revolution was economic and land reforms. The goal of this was to break up the feudal system and give peasants more rights. To accomplish this, the state seized control of land in rural areas and compensated the landowners with a 10-time yearly payment of land value. The land was then redistributed to the peasants who had worked there but did not share in profits. Educational resources, such as how to run the business side of farming, were made available but not well used. Other programs offering fair and sustainable loans for buying seeds and equipment were also offered. New technologies, such as combines, were also gradually introduced to increase efficiency and modernization. All of these programs were necessary to the success of the land reforms, but required mass funding from the government, which relied heavily on oil revenue. With a similar purpose, new policies designed to help lower-level industrial workers share in profits and gain more rights were also introduced. Industry was a minority, which was 80% rural but was a growing sector. The reforms created new jobs and made existing ones more appealing, which encouraged people to participate in modernization. Both of these reforms were intended to reduce income inequality as well as the power of elite landowners and oil tycoons.
This ushered in a new era of rights for all. However, the Shah took it to the opposite extreme with his policy on Kashfi-hijab. He made it to where women were banned from wearing the hijab in public, which was met with heavy backlash. Women wanted to preserve their Persian heritage and embrace their culture. However, banning the hijab was an attack on their identity. On the 8th of January 1936, Reza Shah issued a decree known as Kashfi-hijab, banning all Islamic veils, an edict that was swiftly and forcefully implemented.
Women were allowed to participate in government and were given more rights and responsibilities. Women were allowed to divorce on their own accord, allowed to vote, no longer viewed as possessions of their husbands, and the legal marriage age increased from 13 to 18 to give them a chance to receive a higher education. As Farah Pahlavi, the Shah's wife, stated in an interview, that is not enough in itself because we want women to be educated as well as having equal social status and political freedom.
Modernization was rampant in both society and the economy. An attempt to socially westernize was seen where women were encouraged to dress less modestly, which was violating Islam. The Shah wanted Iran to be an example of the West, and nobility soon began to buy things solely based off the origin in the West. This led to an opposition, as people did not want to lose their Iranian identity in favor of an American one. The Shah capitalized on natural resources such as oil in an attempt to further his economy to fund the military.
The White Revolution's modernization and economic reforms had mixed results. Land was successfully redistributed and power shifted away from the nobility to give peasants more rights. According to President Eisenhower in 1957, after 5 years of the White Revolution, over 50% of Iran's rural families had owned land. However, the peasants were not prepared to do so and did not have the education to make good business choices. The Shah also implemented many contemporary Western ideas in a region known for its devotion to tradition, which caused many to reject his reforms.
All of the modernization plans were far too ambitious, and incoming revenue could not keep up, increasing debt and making Iran desperate for more money from the U.S. and oil. For example, paying landlords on a mass scale within a short time frame was expensive, which made the elites angry and increased debt. While these reforms were well intended, they implemented too much change too quickly.
The economic reforms were not complete failures. Even while the state treasury suffered, GDP per capita greatly increased to its peak in modern Iranian history. At the start of the White Revolution, GDP was at an all-time low of around 2,000, but rose to over 7,500 after the economic reforms. This increase in wealth was shared equally among the population.
Education was the most successful of the White Revolution policies and was the only one that would survive the Iranian Revolution. By the end, over 40% of Iran was literate. The progress was shared by both men and women who had previously been excluded and helped give them more rights. Rural areas were targeted and improved. Increasing education for all, especially in marginalized groups, was a priority of the White Revolution and showcases how it increased equality.
Another goal of the White Revolution was to increase voting and government participation for women. Female representation reached its height during the White Revolution, with 22 women in parliament and 333 on local councils. Women and the working classes were granted voting suffrage for the first time. However, it meant little because there was only one viable party to, quote, vote for, the Shah.
The White Revolution was meant to increase liberty, but the Shah violently suppressed criticism. Most of the American aid funded the Shah's secret police, which he used to suppress liberties such as free speech. He was known for his mass arrests and torture. When questioned about his controversial activity, he replied, "To go through with reform, one can't help but be authoritarian." His backlash only fueled the Iranians' anger and resistance movement.
The Iranian Revolution followed suit, which completely changed the political and social landscape. Ayatollah Khomeini started the Islamic Revolution in 1979, which called for the upheaval of the Shah and gained support of people as they wanted their identity back. He twisted it to be a religious conflict and wanted to topple the monarchy. Heavy fighting ensued, with insurgents taking to the streets.
The long-term impacts of the White Revolution have evolved the global political and social landscape. The now Iranian theocracy abuses power and operates a fake democracy. They use Sharia laws as an excuse to discriminate against women, turning back the clock on equality. The government also punishes critics and restricts freedoms of speech and press. It capitalizes on the 90 to 95% of Shia Muslims residing there and the importance of Islamic values to justify their rule.
Mahsa Amini was a prominent figure in the fight against modern-day Iran's theocracy, as she was one of the many women subject to torment for attempting to exercise her rights. She was killed for refusing to wear the hijab in 2022 and speaking out against the government, her constitutional right. This launched a protest movement where women demanded the right to choose whether or not to wear the hijab. The government deliberately poisoned girls in over 58 schools nationwide as a show of punishment and as a warning.
Iran has become more anti-Western in their views. They were dubbed part of the Axis of Evil by George Bush following the revolution, solidifying their dislike for America and its allies. The risk of nuclear war has been increasing as Iran is collecting weapons of mass destruction and allying themselves with Russia and China, two of America's main adversaries.
The Iranian White Revolution enforced a series of inclusive reforms in an attempt to modernize a developing nation. The government of Iran had a responsibility to support and collectively advance the country state and did so by increasing equality and rights.